Welcome to Widowed Too Soon, where real-life widows and widowers come together to share their stories of survival, faith, and the journey of finding hope in the darkest of times. Whether you're newly widowed or have been on this journey for some time, each week we're here to provide you with inspiration, practical advice, and the reassurance that you are not alone. You were made to not only survive, but thrive. And now here's your host, a woman who has walked this path herself, who finds solace in writing, joy in speaking, and freedom in dancing like nobody's watching. Michelle Bader Ebersole.
Welcome to Widowed Too Soon. This is Michelle Bader Ebersole, and I'm so excited to be coming back with another guest. Well, a same guest, but a third time. She's right up there with Rob for guest times, is Debbie Soushek. Did I say your name correctly this time or
Yes,
not?
you did.
Oh,
Yep,
finally.
good job.
So you guys may remember Debbie, she first came on in episode 146 and talked about the tragic death of her husband. And then she came back on 151 with her daughter and talked about how to help kids with grief. So, Debbie, we're super excited to have you back this time to talk about your story about meeting your current husband and blending families and just all of this stuff that we have not had time for.
Right.
And so we appreciate you being back on this podcast. And,
Sure.
I know it takes a lot of time, so we really appreciate it. So we're just going to dive right into it instead of doing what's been going on in my life. We're just going to get right into this. So we
Okay.
kind of left off. I mean, we've heard a lot of your story. We've heard about Dave, but we
Sure.
don't know, including myself, which is always fun for me to hear for the first time. We don't know how you met Dave, all of that kind of thing. So let's get started with that. So let's start with, okay, your husband had passed away. And when were you ready for dating? Let's kind of go through your dating journey and then to where you are
Sure.
today.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me back a third time. I'm
You're
honored to be
welcome.
here. And thank you for everybody who's been listening, and I'm glad that I have the chance to help you.
Yes.
So my love story with Dave, actually my whole journey of knowing that I was going to get married again started honestly a week after John died. It was that early out. I talked about this in the first podcast, if you remember. I can remember sitting on the floor in John's office, and my brother was in town. My brother's a pastor, and he was preparing what he was going to say at John's memorial service. And I just had this overwhelming sense. I can't explain it. I know it was from the Holy Spirit, but just this overwhelming sense that everything was going to be okay. I didn't know how. I couldn't wrap my brain around it at that point, but I knew that I was not going to spend the rest of my life on this journey of raising my four children alone. God was going to
Wow.
bring somebody into my life. I didn't want to think about it. It was,
Right.
I wouldn't say I was necessarily offended, but it was like, God, really? Come on.
Right.
John's been gone a whole week. How dare you
Right.
do this to me? Type of thing. But I knew. I was wrestling with it, but I also had a strong sense of peace. But, you know, when I first met John and when I married John, I was 20 years old. And
Young.
now I'm 35 with four kids. Hadn't been in the dating scene in a long time.
Right.
And it was like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what this looks like for somebody in their 30s,
Right.
you know. And I basically decided, God, you're just going to have to bring him into my life and drop him in my lap
Yeah.
because this journey of managing all this stuff and taking care of four kids is overwhelming, and I don't have the brain capacity or the heart capacity to go out and try and find somebody right now.
Right.
Obviously, I wasn't thinking all of that a week out, but over the
Right.
course of really probably the first year of going through
Mm.
all of those firsts and everything, it was just like as so many people have talked about, just getting from one of those moments to the next one, anticipating what it's going to be like,
Yeah.
and then once it's over and behind you, you're like, okay, phew, check that box. I did that. I can keep moving forward, type of thing. But I would say, really, after the first year and after I had experienced all of those firsts, it was like, okay, what now?
Right.
We've done all of that. Is I shared in also in, I can't remember if it was the first or second podcast, but for me personally, the second year was harder for me than the first
Mm.
year. The first year was all about just getting through the firsts. The second
Mm-hmm.
year, every time they would come up, it was just another reminder of, okay, this is my reality now. It's
Yeah.
never going to be back the way that it was. So there's a lot of navigating, finding new or creating new memories, creating new traditions, not to take away from or replace those old ones,
Right.
but they just had to be new because it was never going to be the same again. And those ones that we did back then were sacred, and I wanted to keep them that way.
Yeah.
So, um, I also noticed a lot of my tribe, if you will, the people that were around me after that first year, kind of all started going back to
Mm-hmm.
normal for
Right.
them.
Yeah.
I really started feeling for the first time like a third wheel. I wasn't part
Mm-hmm.
of a couple anymore. Um, I wasn't necessarily seeking out anybody to, for companionship or to just come in and fill that void. I think it was just a natural thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the second year was a little bit more of a struggle of coming to all of those realizations about, okay, I appreciate all these people that have walked beside me, but this is not their journey, it's mine. And so I
Right.
need to learn how to do this by myself without them having to hold my hand. I mean, I was so grateful for them to come alongside and hold that space for me and to grieve alongside me. But now it was like, okay, it's time to pass the baton, if you will, where I need to take this because this is my journey. I have to figure
Right.
this out, what life is going to look like for me and for my kids. And so I started doing more things on my own. I made it a point to go to a movie by myself.
Oh,
I made it
wow.
a point to go to a restaurant by myself, both at lunch and at dinner. I'd always been a
Wow.
stay-at-home mom. I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't in the workforce, so doing those kinds of things was definitely new territory for me.
Yeah.
But I knew it's like, okay, I'm a single person. I have to learn how to live as a single person. Because I was married so young, I never really had the opportunity to do
Right.
much of that. So I knew before I was ready to be a wife to somebody else, I had to learn these things about myself, and be okay with it. I had to be okay being single first. I wasn't about to
Mm-hmm.
just jump into the first thing that came along as a replacement because I was lonely or I didn't
Right.
want to do this alone anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's kind of what my second year was like, was learning and growing and completely making that shift to just being a single mom and doing all of that on my own. You know,
Right.
obviously I had help from my parents and family and that kind of thing, but as far as the day-to-day stuff, I was doing it. I had to learn how. Well, probably about a year and a half ish or so, John died in, or no, I guess it was more like right around the 2 year mark. John died June 3rd. So I was approached at church to be part of a new group that was starting. It was a grief group. It was called
Okay.
Grace in the Valley. Back then, this is in
Oh,
2005. Grace or grief, what do they call it? Grief share
grief
didn't
share.
really exist back
Oh,
then.
okay.
And so this was something that our church had started. And it was called Grace in the Valley because our church was called Grace Community Church, and it was a grief
Okay.
support group. So I was asked to go through a facilitator training to learn to be one of the facilitators to help other people navigate their grief because, my church had watched me and walked beside me through this whole thing. Um, and so I think probably in like May, early May, they were putting out the feelers to see who would be interested in that. And the first group was supposed to meet in June. So also in um, May, well, actually a little bit earlier than that at church, I remember there was this couple that I would always see at church. And all of a sudden, one week, this man was there by himself. His wife wasn't there anymore. I knew she had been sick, but they made the announcement from the pulpit that she had passed away.
Mm.
Um, and so I was like, my little antennas went up, and I'm like, okay, I need to go meet this guy just to, he
Yeah.
was about my age, and I need to go meet this guy and just say, you know, not many people can say this, but I do understand
Right.
what you're going through. I can't say I know how you feel, but I do understand because I have walked
Hmm.
this road before. So, if you ever need to talk to somebody to help navigate this stuff, I'd be more than willing to do that. And he said, well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And then over the course of the next couple weeks, I would watch and my heart would absolutely break because it was like the poor man had the plague. All of a sudden, nobody wanted to sit by him at church. People weren't talking
Oh,
to him. And that's a thing. People don't know what to say, so they
yeah.
just stay away. And I
Hmm.
can remember feeling that feeling of being very much alone. Going back to church the first time was scary for
Yeah.
me. I'm very thankful because I had a great group of friends that I would sit next to, and it was an older woman. She was kind of like my mom at church. And so I never really experienced having to sit there all alone and feel like you've got this beacon shining on you type of thing. But this man was like that, and my heart broke for him. And so I'm like, that's why I felt compelled to go
Mm.
talk to him and go say hi because it was like it shouldn't be this way. But people don't know what to do. They don't know what to say, so they just kind of stay away.
Hmm.
So a couple weeks later is Easter, and he was this time was at church surrounded by a couple of younger people with some kids, and I'm like, oh, okay, this must be his family or something like that. But I went up to him again and I said, just wanted to see how you're doing, wanted to wish you happy Easter. And whenever you're ready, I have some great books that I've read that I think would really help you if you're interested. And he's like, oh, that would be great. So a couple weeks later, I brought them to church with me and gave them to him and stuff. And then flash forward to June when we have our first grief support meeting. I walk into the room and lo and behold, here he is. And I
Hmm.
was like, oh, hey. We've formally introduced ourselves at that point, and I said, I'm Debbie. And he's like, hi, I'm Dave Soushek. And so that's how we met each other, really,
Wow.
was in a grief support group. So we started going to this class. It was every, I don't remember, it was Tuesday or Thursday night for like 8 to 10 weeks. And so we would, talk about just various things about grief and the process of grieving, going through it ourselves at the same time learning how to take other people through it. So it was the facilitator training. And so Dave and I were probably the youngest ones in the group. There was, I don't know, maybe 10 of us. Um, but our stories were similar in that we were the youngest people in the group. We had both lost a spouse. Other people had lost a child, an adult child, an infant child. And then there was an older woman who was probably in her late 60s, early 70s, who was widowed.
Hmm.
But Dave and I were younger. I was like 37, 38 at the time, and Dave's 6 years older than me. So, you know, anyway, we started talking and kind of bouncing ideas and sharing things off of each other. And he kept telling me, he's like, I really appreciate all these things that you're sharing because you're farther ahead of me in this process, and it's really helping me. And I said, well, it's really helping me understand where you're coming from because my husband died tragically very, very quickly in an accident. Rug was yanked out from under our lives, but you watched your wife slowly
Hmm.
fade. You walked alongside her. They were married for about 4.5 years was all. And they knew when they got married that she had breast cancer, but they always
Okay.
thought that she would beat it. So that had been their entire,
Wow.
this umbrella had been over them their entire marriage. And so we would just talk and share stories, and then pretty soon the time that we would talk after the class got longer and longer
Hmm.
and longer, and we'd stand out in the parking lot and talk, and we just became really good friends because, as you know, when you're sharing grief stuff with somebody else who has been in the same or who's experienced the same kind of loss, you don't have to explain things. They just get
Right.
it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so it's like not only did we become good friends, but we became close friends very quickly because there was
Right.
this unspoken stuff that we didn't have to talk about that we just got about each other.
Yes.
So we get close to the end of our time, which was, I think we wrapped up the end of August, the first part of September. And our very last session, we both kind of looked at each other and it was like, wow, we're really going to miss this. You know, we've become
Mm-hmm.
friends. My kids got to meet him at church, and I always just
Okay.
introduced him as my friend from my grief
Right.
group and everything. And they kind of looked at him sideways a little bit, but they saw how he talked to me and how he treated me, and so they were okay with that. So our last week comes along and he's like, I've really enjoyed these conversations, but I have a long way to go yet, and I'm not ready for this to be done. Would you ever consider getting together, for coffee or for lunch or something outside of this group so we can continue talking about this kind of stuff? And I was like, sure, I would totally be okay with that. Um, but let me back up a little bit, because as I'm going through this process, we started in June, but I would say probably about halfway through, I started getting these really weird, fluttery feelings towards
Mm-hmm.
Dave. And I was like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
What's all this about? And I can remember one time very vividly. I was we got to church, and my daughter's class, she was 5 or 6 at the time. The teacher wasn't there yet, so her class wasn't quite open. So we went in, started during worship time, and then I left to take her to her class. And I come back, worship is over, everybody's sitting down. I open up the doors in the back of the church to walk in, and I hear this voice behind me say, "That man's going to be part of your future someday." And when I opened up
Wow.
the doors, my eyes went straight to Dave, where I knew he was always
Wow.
sitting. And I turned around and I'm looking, I'm like, who said that?
Wow.
And now I know that was the voice of God telling me
Yeah.
that, he had a plan for this. And he didn't say, you're going to marry this guy or anything like that. He just said, this man's going to have play a role in your future. And so I was like, huh, okay, well, I'm going to tuck that back in there and
Yeah.
just see what happens. And so after that happened, that's when I started having those fluttery feelings towards Dave and stuff. So when he first asked me, would you ever consider this? I was like, yeah, but at the same time, I knew that I didn't think he was ready yet.
Yeah.
And he had made that abundantly clear in our class that he was never going to get married again. He had been married for I don't know, about 14, 15 years to his first wife, who's still alive, and they divorced, and it was not
Mm.
a good scene at all.
Mm.
She's the mom of all of his
Okay.
kids. And so he met his wife, Doreen, and the nature of their relationship was so vastly different than his first wife. He's just like, God's brought this woman into my life. She's amazing. I understand. He always says, I understand fully what what true love is. So how could
Mm.
I expect to be blessed again after
Mm-hmm.
that? So he was very adamant in our class that he was never going to get married again. He was just very content to have been blessed and just to go about living his life. And so I'm just assuming, well, nothing's going to happen with this. It's never going to go anywhere. But we, a couple weeks later, I think it was the third week of September. Actually, I know it was September 21st. That day is
Yeah.
burned in my brain.
Uh-huh.
We met for lunch for that day, and just to talk about, what life had been like for each of us after we were done with the class and stuff like that. Also, September 21st was the ministry launch for all of the fall ministries for our church, and that's when this Grace in the Valley was officially launching as a new
Mm.
ministry at the church. So we had to be there that night for the kickoff dinner. So we met for lunch, and I was thinking it was just going to be an hour-long lunch or
Yeah.
something like that. Well, we ended up shutting the restaurant down
Wow.
probably about, I think we met at 11:30, and we ended up shutting the place down around 3:30 or 4 o'clock.
Nice.
And as we all have something that we do that is our grief work, whether we take up a new hobby or
Right.
we exercise ferociously or something. There's something that we do to help us process through our grief.
Mm-hmm.
So Dave's grief work was he bought a house.
Mm.
He bought an old house and he was going to completely gut this thing and remodel it. And so he had always shared in our class over 8 weeks. We got a weekly update about how the house was going, and and so we had our lunch at this restaurant that was just a couple blocks away from where he lived in this house. And so he's like, I've told you guys so much about this house. Do you want to come and see it? We're really close. And I was like, sure. So I followed him to his house, and he started going through explaining all this stuff in what he'd been doing and what his plans were for it. And I was like, well, that's really cool. And so he started showing me, he had drawn lines on the concrete about where he had ideas for rooms and things like
Oh,
that.
wow.
And so we started talking about, well, that's cool. Well, what if that were over there? And what if this
Mm-hmm.
wall got moved and this became a bathroom? And pretty soon, I was there for hours. And pretty soon it became, well, what if we did this? What if
Oh,
we
wow.
moved this over here? And both of us just kind of stopped and looked at each other, and it was like my heart rate is going and I'm like, what's happening here? And he was kind of feeling the same thing, and I was like, I know what I'm feeling, but how are you doing with all of this, because you're adamant that you're never going to get married again. And he's like, I'm processing all of this. I'm not sure what's happening, but so anyway, I was there for a couple hours, and then I looked at my watch. It's like, oh my gosh, I got to run home because my kids were there. I got to,
Yeah.
touch base with the kids. I got to change my clothes so I can turn around and come back to church for this ministry dinner. Well, something happened. There was this major shift that happened. So when I came back for that ministry dinner, there was like chemistry. There was like
Mm.
this connection that we both, I'm sure it was all over both of our faces, because so many people at church had seen us becoming friends. I
Yeah.
started sitting next to him at church because I
Uh-huh.
didn't want him to be there alone. So people were seeing us together.
Right.
And then we're back at this ministry thing, and people are looking at us sideways because
Uh-huh.
they could just tell
Yeah.
there was something going on. And so at the end of that dinner, we he lived only a couple blocks away from the church, and he would always walk, rather than drive his car, because it
Yeah.
was just a quick walk. But this was the end of September and it was chilly at night. And so we would always talk in the parking lot outside my car. And so I said, and he's standing there shivering, visibly shivering and
Mm-hmm.
shaking in the cold. So I said, why don't you just hop in? I'll just drive you home. It's only
Yeah.
2 blocks around the corner. So we get to his house, and we started talking again, and we were sitting in my car talking again for hours. So here it is,
Wow.
like 11:30 at night, and he finally just stopped and he looked at me and he said, are you feeling what I'm feeling?
Aw.
And I said, yeah, I am. um I'm not quite sure what to do with it. And he said, well, he said, I'm not the kind of person that does anything halfway. He's like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And so he's like, I'm either all in or I'm all out. How do you feel about that?
Yeah.
And it was just like, I think I'm in. I really do. I don't know what this is going to look like, but I think I'm in. And so by the end of that conversation, we knew that we were going to get married.
Oh my goodness.
So we had one date and
Wow.
we knew we were going to get married. We were friends for months
Right.
before that. But then it was like, okay, so if we're going to do this, what's next? And he's like, well, if it weren't for the fact that we didn't each have kids, then I'd marry you tomorrow.
Right.
We both know what we want.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not waste any more time. And so that was in September. So shortly after that, we started getting the kids together, all of us, and just he had a boat, so we went out on the lake, took the kids, for a fun tubing or something like that, just to have fun and do fun things together to get my kids used to being around him,
Yeah.
introduce his kids really. Um, And so November 11th, he called me in the morning, and he's like, it was really early, and I knew he got up early for work, and he's like, can you drive and meet me at this one spot? And he's like, there's going to be a beautiful sunrise this morning, and I wanted to watch it with you. I'm
Mm.
like, half groggy. Okay.
Yeah.
So I get out of bed, I drive to go meet him, and he proposed to me
Oh,
there.
wow.
So yeah,
Wait.
and
So how long was that from that? Just a
two
couple
months,
months. Oh my
just a couple
goodness.
months. Yeah.
Wow.
So we had our first date in September. He proposed to me in November. And having both of us been married before, and we had two houses between us, but we had everything. We didn't need
Right.
anything fancy. S- um, so we set a date for basically about 6 weeks later, not
Oh
six
my
weeks,
goodness.
couple months, 4 months,
4 months? Okay.
November, December, January, February, 4 months. Yes. So
4 months.
we set a date
Okay.
for March. So unbeknownst to me, before he proposed to me, he arranged to meet my kids,
Mm.
my boys, and he sat my kids down and said, I have fallen in love with your mom, and I feel like God has brought your mom and you guys into my life.
Mm.
And I count that an honor, um, to be part of your life. And he said, I um, don't take this lightly, but I want to be a dad in your guys' life, but I will never, ever try to take your dad's place.
Right.
I want to
So
earn the
good.
right to be a dad to you guys. I will never expect you to call me dad or anything like that, but I love your mom, and I want to take care of her and help take care of you guys. Would you do me the honor of allowing me to do that? And my girls were just kind of like, I'm not sure what's going on, because they were like 7 and 9 at that point.
Yeah.
And my boys were, how old were they? 13 and 15, I think.
Mm.
And so he was really asking the boys' permission
Right.
more so than the girls. And they said, yeah, I think that would be okay. So he told me later that if my boys had said no, he wasn't going to propose yet.
Wow.
So he got their permission. Um, or not permission. He didn't need their permission. He got their blessing.
Yeah.
Um, so then he proposed to me. So we got married in March on St. Patrick's Day.
Oh.
So it was, we had a wedding. We didn't want to go to the courthouse or something like that, but we wanted an actual wedding. So we invited, friends and family, and we honored John, and we honored Doreen at our wedding, with a candle ceremony, just, saying that our our families have been brought together, and this is a true story of how God has created beauty out of the ashes
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
loss for both of us. And so it wasn't weird. It was a very beautiful thing to honor both of them. That they, have impacted us. It's because of them that we're here together today. And so we decided to take 2 weeks for our honeymoon, because we knew that we were going to be blending a family,
Yeah.
and it was going to be, hit the ground running when we came back. So we had 2 full weeks. I was
Nice.
thinking about this the other night. I honestly don't remember who stayed with my kids.
That's funny.
I'm pretty sure it was my mom, but I'm like, 2 weeks is a long time.
Yeah.
So, and now that, I'm a grandma and I'm spending weekends taking care of some of my grandkids, it's like I'm exhausted after a couple of days. So
Yeah.
my mom's a saint for doing that.
Yeah.
But
And where did you go for your honeymoon?
we went to Maui.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So we loved it. Absolutely loved
Yeah.
it. Can't wait to go back there again.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's kind of our love story. It happened very fast, but
Yeah.
we knew that God was in it from the very
Yes.
beginning. And it didn't have to be a long, drawn out process for us to know and have that confirmation. And, I was at this point was 2.5 years out. And I
Mm-hmm.
had always known from the beginning that I was going to get married again, and that God was going to bring him to me. And that was confirmed by God saying out loud to me, this man's going to be part of your
Yeah.
future. And Dave was not convinced. Um, and I also found out later, he met with his best friend, who was also the pastor who married us. And he sat down with them and said, okay, I'm having these feelings for Debbie, but I didn't think I was ever going to get married again, and I don't know what to do with that. And he said, I don't know how I feel about that, because it hadn't even been, I think it had been barely, or like 14 months, I think, after when we got married. It hadn't been very long
Yeah.
for him. And so he was getting some pushback from her family,
Right.
um, from a few naysayers that are like, why are you jumping into this so fast? And he's like, again, he told his pastor friend, he's like, I don't do anything halfway. So if I'm going to do this, I'm going to be all in. But I have myself so convinced that I was never going to get married again. Why am I feeling this? I don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And his pastor very wisely told him, he's like, you might not know how you feel about this yet, but you know how she feels about God.
Mm.
And so if God's telling her that, so Dave was again praying, and God confirmed that in him. And he said, you know how she feels about me.
Mm.
And Dave said that was all that he needed to know, that this was
That's good.
the right thing. So,
Did you feel any grief along the way as you were
oh my
dating?
gosh. Oh yeah,
Just tell us about that, what that was like.
definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I felt a lot of guilt
Mm-hmm.
initially about even considering feeling that way about somebody else.
Right.
But I also knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that John would approve,
Mm-hmm.
and that John would like him. The the biggest struggle that I had in getting remarried again was, obviously nobody's going to fill John's shoes as a husband or as a father, but I need somebody who's going to help me raise these kids, somebody
Mm-hmm.
who's going to love them as his own, and, sacrificially and unconditionally. Um, and it was like, I can't find that, Lord. You've got to bring that to me. And I believe, with all my heart, that God was preparing me to be ready just as much as God was preparing Dave to be ready. And that our paths didn't cross in this way until we were both ready.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I had to. I remember that. I don't know if guilt is necessarily the right word.
Right.
It
I
was
know.
more fear
Mm-hmm.
of how am I going to do this? Is there room in my heart for both of them?
Right.
Because nobody's ever going to replace John. But
Right.
how do I love somebody else? Is
Right.
that even possible?
Mm-hmm.
And I learned that yes, it absolutely is possible. There is a John-sized hole spot in my heart that is
Right.
just for John,
Yep.
and there is a Dave-sized hole, a spot just for Dave in my
Right.
heart. And they both can live together. They don't
Yes.
replace each other. It doesn't wipe anything out. It's that, like Katie talked about, the and over the or, the
Yes.
both and. I can love them both unconditionally, 100% with all of my heart, without taking away any love for John. And Dave, from the very beginning, has always been very, very amazing at honoring everything to do with John,
That's so
never
great.
feeling guilty, never feeling pushed aside, never feeling less than, like he wasn't getting all of me. So he's done an amazing job, and I have tried to do the same thing by honoring Doreen. So on our grief days, our anniversaries, birthdays, the death days,
Right.
all of those
Mm-hmm.
things, we have always honored the other spouse. Sometimes we do it together, sometimes we don't. Sometimes
Right.
I will go to Doreen's gravesite by
Wow.
myself,
Mm.
just to honor her and to thank
Wow.
her, type of thing. Um, but I think during that second year, like I talked about, where I was learning how to become me, learning how to become a single person. Um, I had to learn how to do that before I was ready to even
Yes.
consider
Mm-hmm.
loving somebody again. I
That's
had
true.
to fully be okay with who I am,
Yep.
even if God never brought anybody else into my life again. And even
Right.
if I was going to spend the rest of my life being single and not being remarried, I had to be okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned how to do that. It wasn't fun. It wasn't something I really felt like, okay, this is a temporary state for me. It's not always going to be this way, but I have to be okay with it. Um, and so Dave was incredibly generous when I would have those grief moments.
Yeah.
I remember a very, very poignant moment. We were talking about something having to do with John, having to do with the fire department type of thing. And he just very gently and quietly said, when we get married, are you ready to change your identity? And I looked
Mm.
at him, I'm like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, he said, the whole time I've known you, you identify as you're John Cahill's widow. You are a fire department wife. You
Mm-hmm.
know, are you ready to change that or to add to that where you're no longer that's not the only thing that's going to identify you,
Mm.
type of thing. He said, are you I don't think he was asking me if I was ready to let go of it,
Right.
but I didn't realize how tightly I was holding on to those things.
Mm.
And that's when I finally came to the point of, I will always be John's widow. I will
Yep.
always be part of the fire department family, but that's not my identity. That's not who I
Mm.
am.
So good.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
identified by being a daughter of the King of the universe.
Exactly. Yep.
And that is my primary identity. Everything else just are parts of me, but that's not really who I am. And when he asked me that question, I really had to pause and think about that and say, am I okay letting go of not holding, putting out with an open hand those things rather than holding them so tightly?
Mm.
He's like, because now you're going to be my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And, yes, you will always be John's widow, but you're very much going to be my wife.
Right.
And, are you ready for that?
Right.
And it took me a couple of days to really process that and think about it. And then it was like, yes, I am ready for this.
Yeah. I
And
relate
so,
to that
yeah,
so much because
yeah,
I kind of went through, for me it was like 16 years of being a cancer survivor's wife. Like it was all
yep,
about cancer, and people knew me as, oh, her husband has cancer. It was like I felt like that was my identity. And
yep,
then I went through being the widow. Her husband died of
hmm,
cancer. And then it was like, okay, I'm about to get married. Am I still a widow?
right,
But I came to the conclusion, and there's been a lot of like back and forth with people in community, like I will always have been widowed. I am not
yes,
currently a widow, but I have
correct.
been widowed. But yes, I had to then move forward. And then I felt like, do I fit in the widow community? It was like a weird, like
Oh, yeah,
who,
oh, yeah,
like going back into now I'm married. And because it's like especially for you with a sudden death, it's like what's the word, whiplash. Like you're like,
oh,
okay,
yeah,
you were married, then you're not, and
correct.
then you're married again. Like it's a strange feeling. I mean, it's a great thing. I'm very thankful for it, but it's
Yeah,
definitely like, no, my identity, and we did this whole thing in our retreat about this, our identity is not in being married or being single or being
yep,
widowed. It is in Jesus. Like that's it. We are daughter of
absolutely.
the King. And so I can totally relate to what you're saying, but it is that like
Hmm.
change of like, okay, I've said I'm a widow for a couple years, but now what am I? And like now,
Yeah,
and even for me, I went through like can I still do widow ministry? Like,
hmm,
can I still work with widows? Because now, yeah, like I still feel
oh, yeah,
this when I go to my widows events, because yes, I relate to them, but I'm the only one going home to a husband. And so it feels
yes,
weird. Like
yes,
I am not in the same place where I'm going home to an empty bed.
yep,
So, and an empty like so it was a weird time for me
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
that, but I think, I mean, I know God still uses us. He's using you, he's
Yes.
using me to still help widows because we've been through that journey. It does not, because we get married again, does not wipe out the fact that we've been widowed. We understand that
Absolutely.
journey and we're able to help people. So I just wanted to say I totally
Yeah.
relate to that. I'd love to continue hearing your story about, okay, you get married, and let's talk about what it was like blending your families. So he
Oh
has
boy.
how many kids, and like how many would be living in your house at the same time, or like
Right.
what was it all like? You came back from the honeymoon, and what
Right.
happened?
Between us, when we got married, we had 7 children
That's like us, yeah.
and 5 grandkids. So when I got married, I
Wait, there were
got,
already grandkids? So you're
yeah,
a young grandma then.
yes, a young grandma. He was a very young grandpa, and his girls were both very young mothers.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that whole element of thing there too. They were both teenagers when they became moms for the first
Okay.
time. So the let's see, his oldest daughter at the time we got married would have been, oh, I don't know, in her probably mid to late 20s. Um, and then his next daughter was just a year and a half, 2 years younger than that. And then his youngest is was 4 months older than my oldest,
Oldest. Okay.
but they were the same year in school.
Okay.
And it was really interesting because my boys knew David because they were all in the same youth group together. They knew him from
Oh
summer
wow.
camps and things. They weren't
Oh,
friends,
crazy.
but they knew
Uh-huh.
of him.
Yeah.
And so both of his daughters were, already parents themselves out of the house at that point. David moved in with us. So we had 5 kids in the house.
Wow.
And so my 2 boys were, let's see, they were 13 and 15, and David was just about to turn 16 at the time when we got married. And so that was, we had a huge house, so that wasn't necessarily a difficult thing. We had to do some remodeling and stuff to add a
Wait, did you
bedroom
move
and a
into that
bathroom.
house that you guys looked at when you were that first date or whatever?
No,
No.
we did
Okay.
not. We did not. We stayed in my house.
Okay.
I was very, very thankful with John, the way he had set up our finances and everything, that I didn't have to work and I got to stay in my home.
Awesome. Okay.
So it was a big house. After we did some remodeling and stuff, we ended up with 6 bedrooms
Wow.
and 3 bathrooms. So all 3 boys were downstairs in the basement. We called it Manland. And and they had their own bathroom down there. And then my girls, they used to share a bedroom, and the other bedroom on the main floor. Our house had 3 floors. The top
Oh wow.
floor was the master suite. It's massive. It was almost as big as a house, but that
Yeah.
was that was the master suite. And then the main floor had a bathroom, kitchen, living room, all of that, and 2 bedrooms. And so one of the bedrooms at the time was John's office, and we didn't use it as an office anymore, so we made it into a bedroom. So my girls each got their own bedroom. So each kid had their own room.
Nice.
Um, and we just decided as soon as we got back from our honeymoon that, we were going to hit the ground running. It was the beginning of April, so they were still in school. David had been moved to schools to our district and all of that. So it was just, for me, it was full on mom mode
Mm-hmm.
of, I had 3 teenagers that had sports.
Yeah.
I had 2 boys in driver's ed.
Yeah.
So it was busy. When you have 5, preteens and teens in the house,
Yeah.
your grocery bill goes
Oh
way
my
up.
goodness, yes.
Um, and so it was just a lot of cooking and having snacks and, all of that kind of stuff. It was a whirlwind, initial couple of months, basically through the end of the school year. But Dave and I decided that because both of our families had experienced loss, we knew
Yeah.
what that was like. We wanted to make sure that we were doing things that would create memories,
Yeah.
because when you lose somebody, you don't lose your memories with them. But
Right.
sometimes that's, if you don't have very many of those, it's very sad. If you don't have a
Yeah.
lot of memories, you don't have a lot of photos. So kind of our family motto became, life is short and time is precious, so make memories everywhere you go.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of what we tried to do. So we ended up getting dirt bikes for the boys. We bought a motor home. We bought a boat, and we were just going and doing and just making memories with these kids.
Mm.
And so they were really having a great time. His older girls, we'd see them, on family gatherings and stuff like that, but didn't really see them a whole lot. Um, my oldest grandson at the time is just a couple months younger than my youngest child.
Mm.
So, that was really weird.
Yeah.
But I would go pick him up and I would take them to Awana and, stuff like that. So it was just a busy time.
Yeah.
Dave and I decided that we were going to prioritize one weekend a month was going to be our time,
That's
and we were
good.
going to go away together. So we had our motorhome. So we spent a lot of weekends just going to the beach or something like that in our motorhome just for the weekend
Yeah.
to, just kind of
Yeah.
decompress and talk about how things were going with us and to just prioritize our marriage.
So good. Hmm.
Um, and we decided very early on that we were not going to let our kids try to divide and conquer.
Yes, that's so important. Hmm.
It's a really common thing
Hmm.
with blended families, whether it's divorce or death, whatever the reason, the biological kids are going to always try and weasel their way in and get between you
Yeah.
and your spouse to get the kids to take the biological parent's side.
Hmm.
And that's the nature of kids. That's just
Yeah.
what they do. So we decided from the very beginning that we were going to be a united front. So, for instance, if my kids wanted something and they would come to me, not us, but just me to ask, our response was always, let me talk to Dave
Yeah.
and we'll get back to you.
Hmm.
And so they tried, but we were very, very consistent in that. So very quickly they understood that this isn't going to work. We just have to talk to both of them together and we have to be okay with that answer. When it came to discipline, um, the the solution was Dave's like, I am not never going to jump in and try and discipline your kids
Right.
without your knowledge or without your
Exactly.
permission.
Yeah.
You are the biological parent. I will back up whatever you decide. But I'm not going to jump in there with an iron fist and say, I'm the father in this household. This is the way it's going to be
Right.
from now on.
That's, yeah.
And so there was some testing of that with the boys, which I
Yeah.
expected. But he absolutely earned the right to be a father figure in their lives. And all four of mine, absolutely love and adore him
Hmm.
because of that. Um, so there were, oh my gosh, I mean, we got married in 2007. 2008 was a rough year for us um, because of a lot of the challenges. Dave's kids were raised very differently than mine. As I said before, he was divorced before he
Hmm.
married Doreen, so their mom was still very much part of their lives. Um, and she had a hard time with not only his second marriage, but with me. I think
Mm.
she felt very threatened by me, being involved in her kids' lives again, and rightly so. I had to earn that right to to love to be able to love those kids and to speak truth into their lives too. I had to earn that. His daughters were older and stuff. So I was not going to ever speak ill about her to them. If I had an opinion about something, I would say, this is my opinion, but your mom is your mom, and you have to respect her. You have to honor her. We may disagree on this, but she is still your mom. And so that was a difficult thing to have to weather through that. Um, just because of their life experience, my kids were raised kind of in a bubble, very sheltered, um, homeschooled for a few years, very active in our church.
Right.
Dave's kids were not raised like that. They lived with him when they were younger, but not when they were older. They lived with their mom or were back and forth a lot. So my kids were exposed to some things that were brand new that they
Hmm.
had never been exposed to. Um, this caused my boys, especially my second born, to make some not great decisions, some not good choices. The boys ended up getting into some trouble with the law, you know, and
Hmm.
it was challenging. It was really challenging. There were a couple of moments where, um, the boys both my boys both, threw it back in Dave's face. You're not my dad. And
Right.
he's like, no, I'm not. But you don't get to talk to my wife that way,
Mhm.
type of thing. And so it was hard, but my kids did well. Their eyes were open to a lot of things going on in the world that they had never been exposed to before. Um, I was creating that. I Because David lived in our home, David and I very quickly had a very close relationship.
Mm.
Loved him deeply, like, I'd birthed him myself. He just fit right into all of our kids. With his girls, it was harder
Yeah.
because they were very close to their mom. They were parents themselves. Um, so they were cautious,
Yeah.
and so it took a lot more time with them. I was never as close to them as I was to David, ever. Even as they got older, they loved me and I loved them, but it was just different.
Yeah.
My kids didn't know them as well as they knew David
Right.
because, like I said, David lived in the house. He was closer in age. So, family gatherings and things like that, it was, I don't know, for my kids it was a little more weird and awkward because there's this whole nother side of this whole other family
Right.
that they're trying to make sense of and get used to, while still trying to figure out navigating this whole thing of falling in love with Dave as their dad, and that kind of thing, which takes time, absolutely
Yes.
takes time.
Mhm.
So um it was a challenge, but along the way, my 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 kids, like I said, they absolutely fell in love with Dave. They have never called him dad. Like Katie said in the last podcast, she calls him my Dave.
Yeah, I love that.
Um, and Kelly, my youngest, for a long time, um, wanted to use the word step. He's my stepdad. When anybody would refer to him as, well, your mom and dad, she's like, no, Dave's my stepdad.
Right.
And it took her a long time to get to the point where she would understand the and over the or, the
Mm.
both and, because for her, she was only 5 years old when her
Right.
daddy died. And she remembers him, but
Mhm.
she doesn't have nearly the amount of memories that the
Right.
older kids do or that I do. So we always told stories. We
Yeah.
always would talk, show photos, videos, all kinds of things, which would jog her memory to help her remember. But she honestly, I think, was terrified that if she let herself fall in love with Dave as a dad, then that would somehow cancel out her own
Mhm.
dad. And so it took her some time. But she would crawl up in his lap and they would go
Aw.
snowboarding, and Dave and the kids, that was an activity they did every Friday during snow season for years, and just incredible
Wow.
memories. And she loved all of that kind of stuff. My youngest daughter Kelly is her life revolves around horses and
Mm.
rodeo and that whole
Yeah.
world. And so we got her a horse, and Dave taught her how to start driving up the road, helping take care of a neighbor's horse when she was probably 11. Driving the truck on the back roads, teaching her how to back the horse trailer, and all those kinds of things. And all the while, she was chipping away at that um you know he's not my dad, he's my stepdad. But now she's 25 now, and she still doesn't call him dad,
Mm.
but she refers to him as my dad to other people.
Right.
My dad in heaven, and then my parents, us
Right.
collectively. She doesn't use that word step anymore unless it's clarifying, if somebody's going, wait a minute, which dad,
Right.
type of thing. um And I have always, from day one, that Dave and I got married, referred to, I don't like the word step.
Right.
I don't like, I don't know why.
I
I
don't
don't
like it
like that.
either.
When
Yeah.
you have a blended family,
Mhm.
I call his kids my kids. This is my daughter. This is my son. Um,
Mm.
and they referred to me as stepmom. The older ones did, or actually they all did, which is fine because their mom is still alive
Right. That is
and
different.
it's different.
Mhm. Yep.
So, but they, they came to love me and respect me as a mom to them. So it definitely was a challenge, so many layers. And then
Yeah.
you throw in, like I said, there was 5 grandkids in the mix too.
Wow.
So these little ones, that the oldest at the time was 8, I want to say. And so the younger ones, like one of our grandsons was born a week before our wedding.
Oh, wow.
So, for all intents and purposes, I have always been in his life.
Yeah.
And I was at the hospital when he was born. And, you know, um, the other ones that were just a few years older than him don't really remember me not being part of their life, except for the oldest, because he was 8. So I've always been Grandma Debbie to all of these
Yeah.
kids. And then he had another, his middle daughter had another child after we were married. So I've always been his grandma,
Yeah.
his whole life. So um, it was a big shift going from our little, perfect, ideal bubble of a family of mom and dad and 4 kids, 2 boys and
Right.
2 girls, to this
Right.
vastly different family unit and what that looks like. And so, like I said, it's been challenging. Um, Over the years, we'd had ups and downs. David moved out, on his own when he was 18, so it was just my 4 again, but we were still involved in their lives. Um, David ended up eventually living next door to us. He was working for
Oh.
us. Um, but the last couple of years has been very difficult for our family because in 8 months' time, we lost 2 of Dave's adult children.
Oh no.
We lost his oldest daughter, or actually, we lost David first. David was a type 1 diabetic,
Mm.
and he died when he was 30 years old.
Oh.
And Dave and I found him at his little house right next door. So that was really, really rough
Yes.
and devastating. And then 8 months later, his oldest daughter died from heart failure.
Oh my goodness.
So
It's a lot.
now his remaining daughter has had a really difficult time. She
I
was the
can
middle,
imagine.
so she
Mm-hmm.
lost both of her siblings in 8 months' time. Um, it's been hard for her,
Oh yeah.
really, really hard for her. She and I, over the years, became very close. Our relationship has ebbed and flowed. Um, she's not made some great life choices. She's had difficulties. And so during those times when she's, making really bad life choices, she's not close to us, either of us. Um, but she's coming back. And so, but poor Dave, he
Wow.
just sits her down and he's like, I have already lost 2 of my 3 children. I don't want to lose the last one that I have remaining.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really impacted her in the choices that she's making in her life, realizing that, she was overcome with grief of losing both of her siblings, survivor guilt, all of
Right.
that stuff. That those 3 kids were extremely close. And so it's been a really, really tough journey, doing it. But Dave and I have been committed the entire time that, we're not going to let these kids divide and conquer. We are not going
Right.
to let circumstances um, dictate how we live our marriage. We're not going to let circumstances dictate how we love our kids. Our kids are our kids. Dave calls my kids, his kids.
Wow.
Absolutely. Um, and he's 100% earned that right. We're in March it'll be 18 years that we've been married now.
Wow.
So it's really odd to look back and think, you know it was a lifetime ago, my life with John and that
Right.
family. um at the same time, it feels like it was just yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like it was just yesterday that Dave and I got married, and we're coming up on 18 years. You blink and life just flies by.
Right.
So, I do remember it was the year, I think when Dave and I had been married for 16, 15, 16 years, somewhere in there. Um, I hit that milestone, which you haven't hit yet when I woke up one day on June 3rd and I realized that um, tomorrow, June 4th, which is the day after John died, I will now be your widow longer than I was your wife.
Wow. That's probably
And
a strange feeling. Yeah.
it was a really strange feeling. Being married to Dave had nothing to do with that.
Right.
It was just the fact that I was now his widow longer than I was his wife.
Mm,
And I remember telling Dave that, and he's like, wow, I didn't think about that. But he experienced, the same thing. He had been a widower. Um, for us, for him, it was only, 4.5-ish years after, that Doreen had been gone for him. But for me, it was 15.
right.
And so just, wow, I've been married to somebody else longer than I was married to John.
Yeah. That's such
And
a
then,
strange feeling.
yeah, and then I've been his widow longer than I was his wife. And so all of these things, these feelings, these grief moments are all lumped into, your day-to-day life of
Right.
blending a family after loss. And I think for Dave and me both, I'm very grateful for the fact that he was also widowed because he
Right.
gets it.
Mm-hmm.
He was divorced before and he's also widowed. So he understands,
Yeah.
all of those layers.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know what life, let's say for the sake of argument that he hadn't been widowed and he was only divorced. I don't know if his perspective on loving my kids, his perspective on what the grief moments are still like for me, even 20 years later, I don't know that that perspective would be the same
Right.
as it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very thankful for that. God knew what he was doing,
Yeah.
bringing us together.
Mm-hmm.
And Dave's so incredibly tenderhearted, and we joke that he cries more than I do. But my kids know that, and he will just weep whenever he sees my kids having a moment of
Wow.
grief. He just weeps for them because it
Wow.
breaks his heart to see that their heart is still breaking. And he doesn't um, feel the need to say, well, look at me. What about me? I'm here
Mm-hmm.
now. Why are you still crying for him?
Right.
He understands that. Um, he understands the sorrow. He and my kids, their heart just breaks for him because he's lost two of his three
Mm.
kids. It's out of the natural order of things. Parents
Right.
aren't supposed to outlive their children. And so that man has experienced so much grief in his life, so much
Yeah.
loss.
That's a lot.
And yet he's probably the most optimistic person I know. He
Wow.
has an eternal perspective. Um, and he knows that both of his kids are in heaven and
Right.
we'll see them again someday. Doesn't make it any easier.
Mm-hmm.
He knows that they are there with Doreen. They're there with John. And so it's it's work. You definitely have
Mm-hmm.
to work at it. But I feel like we've done a really good job
Yeah.
at it. And our work isn't over yet.
Right.
We have a whole new crop of grandkids now that are coming along. My kids are having babies. So we have, four of those. Katie's expecting number five
Yeah.
in March. But now we've got this whole generation of kids. Now we'll have to explain to them who John
Mm-hmm.
Cahill is to them, who he was, and what's that going to look like. And so we're obviously going to tell stories and he's your grandpa that's in heaven.
Right.
um he met you first before you were born here on earth.
Mm-hmm.
um so
Wow. You guys have been through
yeah,
so much grief. Like, what would you
yeah.
say? So much. I can't
Hmm.
even imagine the loss of children and just you've both lost a spouse. What do
Yep.
you think if someone was to say, what is the single biggest thing that helped you and helped Dave and helped your kids through grief? What would it be?
The Lord.
Yeah, that's what I thought you'd say.
100%. Without that eternal perspective,
Right.
without that hope in Jesus that this is just temporary,
Yeah.
Um, I honestly don't know how I would have survived any
Right.
of this
Exactly.
without knowing that um, I will see John again. We'll
Exactly.
see David and Sonia again. We'll see Doreen again. It wasn't a goodbye. It was, we'll see in a little while.
Yeah.
Um, when you have that perspective, that's what helps you go on
Yeah, for
because
sure.
you have that hope.
Hmm.
Um, Without that hope, you just you drown,
Yeah,
you
exactly. And
know?
and that's what we see happening with a lot of
Yeah,
widows that don't have Jesus. That's the exact reason Mark and
yeah,
I started this podcast, because we
yep,
were in the groups and saw everybody turning to all the wrong things and like we need
yep,
to help them, you know? And so
yes,
that definitely is the top
yeah.
thing that helps you get through it. Another question, so this was a fear for me. I remember getting engaged to Joel, and all of a sudden I was like, wait, if I get married again, I could be widowed again. And I had this like big fear. Did you ever have that fear or have that fear? Like, where is that for you?
I am 100% prepared for that.
Mm-hmm.
The reality of that happening is very high. I have, I don't know why, but I have felt my entire life that I'm going to live to be 100.
Wow.
I'm just very confident in that. If I don't live to be 100, I'll be really surprised. But Dave is 6 years older than I am.
Right.
So chances are very high that he's going to die before I am. At
Right.
what point that is, I have no idea. You know, are we going to live to see 50 years of marriage together? Probably not. But chances are high that I will be widowed again.
Mm-hmm.
And I survived it once. I've learned so much.
Right.
I'm in a completely different place in my life now
Yeah.
that I don't let that um I don't let that operate as a fear
That's
in
good.
my brain anywhere
Mm-hmm.
because none of us are guaranteed
Exactly.
tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things in our grief class that we taught people. That's one of the things I counsel people with is that death is the only guarantee that we have in life. We
Yeah.
are all going to die someday, but
Mm-hmm.
yet it is the one thing that we are the least prepared to deal with.
Yeah. True. That's so true.
Um, I think some of it is a cultural thing. Other
Yeah.
countries, other cultures, they honor death. They
Yep. It's
prepare for it.
different.
It's their perspective is so different than ours is here.
Yeah.
So none of us are guaranteed tomorrow.
Right.
Um, we can't stop it. Only God knows when that's going to happen. But what we can do is make the most of every single day that we do have
That's right.
here on earth. And so, do I worry about Dave? Do I worry about his health? Oh, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. Um, there are certain things that really bother me now that didn't bother me before, like for instance, Dave's in construction. He's always been in construction. He has no hesitation to get out a ladder and climb high and hang over the edge of a roof.
Yeah.
He's taken down trees and all kinds of things. And now when I see him up in high places, I have to walk away or I have
Yeah.
to leave. I just
Mm-hmm.
can't be there. My imagination just wants to run away that he's going to fall. He's
Yeah.
gonna have an
I
accident where he's
hear
gonna
you.
fall. That's what happened to John. And I'm like, I can't see that. I can't do that. And so he understands that now. And I remember a very vivid time for him. He was taking down a tree in our backyard and he was climbing really high in this tree. And he is not afraid of heights, never has been. He's topped trees before. And he was up there and he said he stopped and he looked around and all of a sudden he just had this overwhelming sense like I cannot do this anymore.
Wow.
I can't be up here. I can't do this to Debbie.
Wow.
What if something happens to me? I what's going to happen to these poor kids to lose another dad in their life? I can't do this anymore. So he stopped. He doesn't do that kind of
Wow.
thing anymore. And so, I don't live in fear
Exactly.
that
That's good.
um that I'm going to be widowed again. I know it's going to happen. I don't know when, but I don't that doesn't consider or have any consideration into how we live our lives other than
Right.
let's not do stupid stuff and speed this process
Yeah.
up, of course, let's eat
Yeah.
healthy, let's take care of ourselves, let's
Yeah.
do everything we physically can to take care of each other.
Yeah.
But that's always in the back of both of our minds. It's mine
Right.
too. Um, Dave's wife Doreen died from breast cancer.
Mhm.
So he is adamant that I get checks and I take
Right.
care of myself. And I'm like, okay, I tend to be one that I'm more toward the natural side of things, alternative
Mhm.
treatments, alternative medicines and stuff like that. And he's like, well, we tried that route with Doreen and she died anyway. So he's not a big fan. He's very skeptical of those kinds of
Yeah.
things. So I learned early on when I was first talking to him about those kinds of things that it bothered him that I wasn't willing to do
Right.
more aggressive things to take care of my health. And so, I wouldn't say those are things that we tiptoe around with each other, but it's definitely in the back of both of our minds about,
Right.
okay, we know what this is like. We don't want to go through this again,
Right.
but we also understand that it's a reality. It could happen on any random Tuesday, like Katie said.
Mm. Yeah.
So,
Wow. Yeah, I
yeah.
know when I first thought that, but I was like, just like I say, it's better to have loved and lost than to never love it at all. I would say it's better to have
Hmm.
loved and lost a second time than to have never loved at all. And
Yes.
but I do see it in widows who are
Hmm.
afraid to love again because they don't want to be hurt again.
Yeah.
And I understand that
Right.
feeling, but I also know
Yeah.
that Jesus came to give us life and give us life abundantly. And if that's something we
Yeah.
desire to be married again, not
Right.
everybody does, and that's totally fine. But if we desire, like
Yeah.
you did, and I did, and lots of people do, then we need to go forward and not let fear dictate our
Yes.
lives and are not willing to go in another relationship because we're scared, because there's so
Right.
much that God has for us. And
Right. Well,
this
and
is,
the other
go
thing
ahead.
I wanted to mention is that there were several people, a lot of family members, Doreen's family members, on Dave's side of the family that were like, "Well, you can't get married again, Dave, because you're going
What?
to be Doreen is your wife forever. You know, you can't get married again, because you're still married. She might not be here on earth, she's in heaven, but you're still married."
Mm,
And and he so there was some really difficult times in his relationship with them
yeah.
afterwards, and they kind of pretty much cut all ties with him because
Wow.
they thought that it was dishonoring to her memory, and even other people that I've talked to, it's like, no, I can't, it's a once in a life is
Yeah.
it's a once in a lifetime love. It'll never happen
Mm-hmm.
again. It'll never be the same. And I have learned through my studies of scripture and just from what God has taught me and what books I've read and things like that, that marriage is something that God gives us here on earth.
Right.
When we get to heaven, we will know each other. I will see John again. I will see Doreen again, but we won't be husband and wife. The spousal relationship won't exist in heaven
Right.
because that's not why we're there. We're
Yeah.
there to give honor and praise and glory to God forever. And the marriage relationship isn't necessary there.
Right.
But that's a gift that God gives us while we're here on earth.
Mm-hmm.
And I fully believe, like I said earlier in the podcast, that there's room in my heart for two men
Yep.
at the same time. One's here, one is in heaven.
Yep.
But I fulfilled my wedding vows with John,
Yep.
which was till death do us part.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wasn't ready initially to get married again, but I also knew that I wasn't dishonoring my marriage to John by getting
Right.
married again because I fulfilled my vows.
Exactly.
It was going to look different, and it has. Um, I've been married to Dave longer than I was married to John.
Mm-hmm.
I've experienced a whole lot more difficult things in life with Dave than I had with John. I was young when I married him. I finished growing up
Yeah.
with John. We had our kids together, but it's a whole different life. But
Mm-hmm.
they don't take away from each other
Exactly.
at all.
Yeah.
But I refuse to live in that fear of
Yeah.
this is going to happen again. Because, yeah, the reality is yes, it probably will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it
So, but I had to
doesn't.
be okay with that.
Yeah,
And I 100% or 100% respect people that choose not to get married
right,
again or choose not to move on. I'm not saying you have to,
right.
you know, if God calls you to that, then do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Because, my perspective was I was only 35 when I was
right,
widowed. And like I said, I know I'm going to live to be 100. So that's only a third of my life.
right.
I didn't want to spend the last 2/3 of my life alone if I didn't
Alone.
have to.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a lot of life ahead of me.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, that's good. Yeah, it's
yeah.
your story's been amazing again, third time to hear from you and just to hear about how you met Dave, the
Thank
blending
you.
the families, where you're at. Like we can learn so much from you. And I'm going to go ahead and close us in prayer. So,
Okay.
dear God, just thank you so much for Debbie and her willingness to be here again. I just pray blessings over her family and peace over them and just joy this holiday season. And thank you that she's willing to come on here again and share her wisdom. And thank you for all you've taught her and that she's sharing with us. Pray for all of our listeners today as we head into December and Christmas
Hmm.
coming up. I just pray that you give them joy in places they might not expect it, that they start feeling joy again, and that you cover them with peace, and just continue to heal their broken heart and make beauty from ashes. And we just thank you for each listener who is not here by accident. And we just thank you for all these things. Amen. Well, if
Amen.
you like this podcast, give it a little bing 5 stars on Apple Podcast, wherever you listen. Be sure to click on the link or find me on Facebook, Michelle Bader Ebersole, if you want to join our podcast listeners only group, which is like 62 people. You can join the other one that has 6,600. But if you're like, I can't handle that's too much going on, just come to this one because it's actual podcast listeners, because the only way to find it is through the podcast, which has been awesome. I'm absolutely loving having that group, so that I can connect with people who are listening to the podcast, and we're kind of all in the same, I wouldn't say a place. Some people are new, some people are not, but same. Most of us, as far as I can tell, are Christians and are in the same
Hmm.
faith place, which is really, really helpful. So,
Yeah.
anyways, and if you want to be a guest, there is an application in the show notes. We'd love to have you. We have so many great episodes coming up, so many more guests that I'm interviewing. So, anyways, thanks everybody and have a great day. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Widowed Too Soon with Michelle Bader Ebersole. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe, rate and review. And we'd also love for you to join our Widowed Too Soon community on Facebook. See you next time.